Produced in the traditional territories of the Tewa people, the Santa Fe Art Institute welcomes you back to the Tilt Podcast. How do artists use rituals as deeply personal gestures to inform and enrich their creative practice, and to connect to larger communities, identities, and places? On today's episode, our guests are Tintawi Kaigziabiher and Sara Danielle Rivera, who both share ways in which art can offer meaningful experiences of healing, both on the individual and collective planes. Tony Nezapun and I are pleased to present to you Episode 9, Creative Rituals.
Hello listeners, this is Netapon Ma, and we are super thrilled to have Tintawi Kaigziabiher here with us today. We're sitting here at a central courtyard at the Visual Arts Center in Midtown Campus in Santa Fe. Tintawi is an interdisciplinary artist, doula, Reiki master, writer, and a mother. She's also a nonfiction editor for the Santa Fe Literary Review, a member of Earthseed Black Arts Alliance, and an artist with Vital Spaces. And with great pleasure, welcome Tintawi to the Tilt Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Natapon, and the Santa Fe Art Institute. I'm grateful for this platform.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be sitting here with you at this very site by a tree. I'm going to describe a little bit for the listeners. And Tintawi had made an installation here at this very site in this open courtyard that opens to the sky. And at that time, the tree was at the beginning of winter. It was very cold, and there were no leaves. But somehow, as I was walking through the site, this space resonated with me in connection to what Tintawi had proposed for her installation. And I just wanted to ask you, Tintawi, what is your journey that brought you here to the present moment at that point when you were installing your work?
Well, the call was a beautiful one. The call felt like a prayer, and asking for just support of what our whole community was experiencing around the pandemic. And among my loved ones, among my relatives, among my friends, there was a lot of either resistance or force, not a lot of listening to ourselves or to those things that we can't necessarily hear with our ears, but that are showing up in our lives, and like we're seeing it in our experience. And I wanted to show that it's possible for things to coexist without a fight, and that science and tradition, they already are intertwined, and I think we can use them to support our healing.
Yeah, this current episode is about ritual and creative practice, and I had the honor to witness you and your husband, Itsatu, set up the installation. And I remember the gesture of you on your knees, kneeling down. Describe the installation a little bit for the listeners, and if you're comfortable to share a little bit about the gestures that you had expressed during that time. And I realized that was a very private and intimate moment, and it appeared to be a ritual. And I say this because it is through my lens because my artistic practice um, um, embrace ritual in my work. So I saw it through my lens that it was a ritual. So I wanted, I'm just curious if you may share some of your insights, the description of the installation itself, the title of the installation, your gestures that you had expressed to our listeners.
I mean, some of it, oh, wow, some of it just natural, like we're walking on this soil, so I know it's supporting me, you know. I know it's made up of my ancestors, you know, the ancestors of all of those who walked this earth before me. And yeah, so giving thanks always to that first, you know. We usually will pour water. Water is a cooling energy we want to give our ancestors refreshment. We know that we can't see them, but they're still with us. And so when we say mojuba, mojuba is like a praise, a giving thanks. And so mojuba egum, giving thanks to our egum, because through them, everything that we know comes, you know. It's a conversation between our experience walking on this earth and what they have shared with us through, you know, our lineages. And yeah, that was a part of the whole process, you know, while making the sketch for the piece, and wanting to make sure the prayers that I had carried and that people around me had carried for their loved ones over the course of the year could be felt through the staff. Um, and also it's a meditation, you know, each bead is a prayer. Each bead, you know, is a hope, a wish, thanksgiving, you know. And so we wanted that represented, and the mask, I guess more of a modern way to show that we can protect ourselves. There's things that we can do with technology and information that has come. There are ways that we can protect ourselves and our loved ones, and that we can use both. Yeah.
What can you describe the what you had tied onto the trees?
Oh, so when in the tradition I come from many traditions, but the tradition that I guess I carry the strongest is this Lukumi tradition, which is it's a diaspora religion, a diaspora tradition, a diaspora response to what our ancestors were able to carry across the water and retain, and what they were able to make work for them on this land. So in this tradition, as we honor our ancestors, we usually will find a staff. And there's a whole ceremony and process of consecrating that object and making it something more than just this ordinary stick, which isn't ordinary anyway. But the colors, Egun, our ancestors are represented by 9 colors. And so the fabric tied on the tree is like the fabric that we tie on the top of our Egun sticks to, yeah, just to represent all of those who walk before us. Yeah.
What I had witnessed from my recollection, I was standing right there, you know, at the entrance of this space, and I just saw you kneeling down in front of the Egon staff, and there were at the base of the tree, you had created a mound filled with dirt and soil, and next to it, to the left of the mound of dirt and soil, there was a jar of water, and you had poured some water into the ground, and that was the reason why, when we were brainstorming about, the current episode, I immediately about rituals. So I immediately thought of that experience because, as a child, and I shared this with you the other day, as a child living in Thailand, rituals are so embedded in our daily lives. In the mornings, I remember my father and my mother would get up before the sun came out to prepare food to offer to the monks when they come and make their alms round. And then as a child, I remember putting food in the alms bowl. And at the end of the alms round, the monks' alms round, if there's water left over, I would walk across the street with my sister, and she would pour the water at the palm of my little hands, and watch it from the palm of my hand spilled into the soil to nurture the plant. And your gesture recalled that memory for me. Also, the fabric tied to the tree. I had also shared this with you on Monday when we had walked the site and thought about, okay, what to talk about. But there's a significance to the fabric as well for where I'm from. And I had mentioned to you that if you're in Bangkok or anywhere in Thailand, or even walking amongst in the temple grounds, if you see a very old tree, you'll see fabric tied around those tree, signifying that this is a sacred site. And you'll see makeshift altars where Thais would make offerings to these old trees. So the fabric that I saw reminded me of that.
It makes us pay attention. That's what it sounds like, is the connection. Like it makes us pay attention to what's around us is sacred, It's not just a tree. It's not just a staff. It's more than that by our willingness to pay attention, to slow down like we were talking about the other day. Yeah.
And where we come from places so far, separated by oceans.
Yes.
But yet, we are able to make these connections.
Yes, we're doing the same things. The same things, It may be a different weave of cloth or a different way it is draped or, yeah.
And here we are in Santa Fe.
Yes. Yes. Right?
You'd mentioned that you've come from multiple places. Please share with our listeners these the tapestry of different places that you've touched that led you here.
Yeah, growing up as a child, I grew up in a suburban area about 15 minutes from New York. And I remember sweeping this little area in my backyard and imagining, I don't even know if it was imagining, but feeling that I was somewhere else in an older time. And I didn't always know why I felt those things, but, as my life has evolved, I've learned more and still learning more about my ancestry. So, my mother was born in the United States. My father was born in the United States. My father is Jewish. My mother and my stepfather that I grew up with, they were Muslim, of African descent. of Native descent, of Australian descent.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had so I had a mixture of culture around me, not just because of my family, but also because of where I grew up in New York and New Jersey. Um, my great grandfather on my mother's side, one is from Liverpool,
Uh-huh.
the other from here. So our family is all mixed up. My great grandmother came to New Mexico. She was an orphan. Her mother was Australian, her father from New York. And we don't know why, but they gave her up for adoption. She had my grandmother, and when my grandmother was maybe in her 20s, my
Mm-hmm.
great-grandmother moved out here to New Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
to Roswell. We don't know why she came. And I came out here in my teens
Mm-hmm.
to see her and to see my great-grandfather, and she passed not long after, and I stayed to be with my
Uh-huh.
great-grandfather. And um, long story. We moved back to, I stayed in New Jersey. I met my husband, and one day, when we couldn't figure out where to go, we saw that we were being led to New Mexico again.
Mm.
Yeah.
What is the significance of this ritual have in your creative practice?
I think the majority of my creative practice is ceremonial art.
Mm.
Um, so a lot of it is for prayer. The vessels that I make are to hold the sacred implements of the Orisha.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also made vessels for Orthodox churches.
Mm-hmm.
I've made staffs for Orthodox churches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yeah, I mean, ceremony is it is art. Art is ceremony. It's you're taking something and you're putting your intention into it. You're breathing life into it, whether it be the clay or glass beads
Mm-hmm.
or cotton threads or 'cause I crochet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just pick up what feels right for what the call is. I respond a lot to calls,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether it be in my spiritual house or a spiritual house. But
Mm-hmm.
most of my work is responding to calls.
Mm-hmm.
Some
Mm-hmm.
comes from, you know, the universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Vessels and egun staff. I want to um, go back to the installation. When you place the egun staff into the ground, describe what was going through your mind.
Um, I think I was thinking about at that moment all the people that had crossed over um, this past year. Most of them through the pandemic and due to COVID-19, but not all. Some it was their time for other reasons, and I thought about them a lot last year. I spent a lot of time myself in the hospital last year with our daughter, so I had a lot of moments to reflect on life and what it means and what we're here for and how we can support each other and um, tapping that staff. This theme of slowing down,
Mm.
like that's how we remember what we're connected to and who we're connected to. So I was thinking of loved ones, some other families who had children in the hospital with my daughter and lost loved ones while they were there, and neighbors that used to babysit me growing up that are now ancestors, and um, all the numbers you see on all of these statistics of what is happening around the world, like I would say at that installation specifically, those were the people that, and those were the names that were coming into my mind. There were some little stakes where there were relatives of people who crossed over that asked us to put their names with the installation, and so they walked with that piece. They were that was them calling for this work, right? To this way of honoring, this way of remembering, this way of protecting their loved ones that are still here.
This is a good segue to my next question. How do rituals heal?
I guess first because they acknowledge that something is happening or needs to happen, right? Like if someone is sick, you want to bring them comfort, you want to bring them support, you want them to feel love. I think that's the same in everything, really. Like it's the same when you are at a birth. It's the same when you are at a funeral. It's the same feeling I felt being with someone crossing over and with someone coming in, both crossing. So the acknowledging, right, that something is happening here, you know? Somebody needs an honoring of some sort. And then gathering those ingredients, you know? What is it going to take for them to feel that, you know? Is it a herb? Is it a color? Is it a texture? Is it a taste? Sometimes it's all of those things. And bringing them together, you know, bringing those ingredients together. And I like to say making holy water a lot, because I think it's something that transcends this particular tradition and is just, it's a universal practice of using water to cleanse and water to uplift and water to support. And so, we take these ingredients and we make our prayers, we set our intentions, and in that we're transforming not just these objects or even parts of these living things. We're transforming the energy around the space, around the person, and we're carrying out through our mouths. In this walk, we carry out. We use sound. We use our voices to say out loud what it is that we want to occur here, like what we want to push forth and bring forth. So,
yeah, the reason why I asked this question is because rituals do heal me in my practice, expressed through my work, but yet also, you know, there are rituals that are private, but you know, it's difficult for me to distinguish between what's ritual and what's art, and what's ceremony, what's art, because in my life, the way that I live, going about the day, it's inseparable. And I'll share this story with you as to why I asked this question, and it was because you brought up ritual, ceremonies, ritual. You talked about birth, you talk about death. And as you were sharing that with me, um, I traveled back to the time 4.5 years ago, um, as my father was dying. And I felt helpless at that time.
Mhm.
I didn't know what to do except just gestures.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there were very simple gestures of um, reminding my father to breathe in and breathe out, breathe in and breathe out. Um, and it's similar to a mother's birthing
Mhm.
too. And
Mhm.
I played a chant as I was reminding my father to breathe in and breathe out. Um, to arrive at his last breath, where is the calmest breath before he parted. And that was healing for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Um, I I asked that question specifically because time and time again throughout my life, um, it does heal. Small gestures,
Mhm.
but these small gestures, through rituals, over time, little by little, it becomes um, something significant.
Yes, little by little, right? It builds. It yeah, it gains momentum and more energy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. He labored towards his last breath,
He labored.
towards his
Mhm.
last breath, and
Mhm.
it was peaceful when he passed.
Mm.
It was very peaceful.
Mm.
And I resonate with your work on that level.
Mhm. Likewise. Mhm.
How do you, when we parted after you finished your installation, you had asked me, oh, when people come, you know, take the water to
Mm.
water the base of this
Mm.
tree.
Mm.
Um, as, aside from these invitations, can you share with our listeners other ways you connect with your community through uh, your creative rituals?
So huh. The information for art is and these rituals, like, because it's really hard for me to separate, but they come through our elders, like they will tell us if we're making something and it's not right. They will tell us it's not right.
Mm,
Like there's a way, there's
mm,
a form,
mm,
and of course through every human it comes forth differently,
mm,
right? But they're the ones that share the information. And so beading is something we would do as a community.
mm.
My godmother would get my god sisters and I together, and we would sit in her house, and she would put out the beads, and she would say, "Don't mix my beads." Like, there was an order, there was a
Uh-huh,
way to do this.
uh-huh.
And so you learn, because when the beads get mixed, if the colors get mixed, I mean, it becomes very difficult to make this intricate piece you were trying to make, or to find the right colors you need for this part of the weaving, or whatever it is that we're making. And so I guess that's the way we learn, just sitting with the old folks
Mm,
and the ones who would not want to be called old folks, but they're our elders. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, I didn't get any of this by myself,
mm,
you know?
mm,
They would tell us if you're making a vessel, is it watertight? You
mm,
know, did you test it?
mm,
You know, oh, you wanted to put something else on it. What is your intention here? Why are you doing this?
mm,
What does this represent? You know, and so they guide us, and that's how we. Uh, it is communal. This tradition doesn't exist without community. There is no soul Orisha practitioner or devotee or priest, because you can't become any of those things by yourself. And I guess I guess that's where some of the separation happens, because of course not the whole world sees your initiation or the time that you spend with your elders learning these ways. Not everyone sees that, but they see what you bring for them, what you share with them. And then, yeah, you hold some for yourself, right? Like, we're important too, you know, in our walks, and the honorings that we put in place for ourselves are sacred too. So we should keep something for ourselves,
mm.
you know.
Tintawi, it's been a pleasure to sit here to chat with you. Just one last thought. Do you have any forthcoming works or projects you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, I have one that can't fit in my studio. um, I think I'm building the place that I saw as a little girl. I think I'm building this room. It's come together from, or it's coming together from a lot of found objects, straw, earth, things that are free. I think part of it is, this one is my children's calling for me to prove a point, and for my childhood dream to also manifest into this room that is made, that I have created with my own hands, my own prayers. It's about 10 by 15. There's nice curves, and there's a really cool feeling when you walk into the space. So far, it has no roof. And yeah, this is just going to be a space for prayer. So,
Well, keep us
yeah,
posted on where this will land.
I
And
definitely
we will
will.
definitely have a follow-up for our listeners and our social media of this place for prayer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tintawi.
Thank you for having me, Natafon. Really grateful for this opportunity and for this exchange.
Likewise.
So I'm really excited to be talking today with Sara Danielle Rivera. She is an artist, a writer, a translator, and an educator based in Albuquerque. And her works, really investigate the translation of language, both across cultures and through forms. And it's really interesting to think about the ways in which that manifests through different ritual, whether it's collaboration or participatory action from the audience. And so, Sara, I'm just really excited to dive deeper into some of these topics with you today. Welcome to the Tilt podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I was really struck by your recent project, After Beams, which is a site-specific installation that I know was a collaborative project with another writer, Amaris Ketchum. and installed at Fort Sumner, which is the site of the historic Bosque Redondo, where the Dene and Mescalero Apache were brought forcibly through the Long Walk by the US government as their displacement from their traditional territories. And that this is a collaborative project, in part funded by New Mexico Arts. And I'm just wondering if you can, tell me a little bit more about the background and origin of that project.
Yeah, so this is part of the annual exhibition Time, Temporary Installations Made for the Environment, which travels to different sites around New Mexico. And this particular site, Amaris was the one who initially reached out to me for the collaboration. We're both text-based artists. We are both writers. We're both interested in ecology and in memory. And so we were very drawn to the site that they chose this year, and they wanted to curate a group of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists. So when we were selected, we were very honored and humbled in the trust placed in us as the non-Indigenous artists to be addressing this site. And both of us also, much of our work manifests in community engagement and community workshops. So we knew that we wanted that to be an aspect of the work. In terms of ritual, the Bosque Redondo Memorial is a very ritualistic space. The area where the exhibition took place is a set of 4 contemplation circles that visitors can sort of experience in order, and each one has a different association with a different color, a different location, a different time of day. And one moves from the contemplation circles into this kind of meditative circular walk into the sort of museum space itself that commemorates everything that happened at the site. So we were chosen to work with the Western Contemplation Circle, which was associated with the color yellow. It was associated with dusk and with the location of the San Francisco Peaks outside of Flagstaff. So we created these sort of freestanding steel sculptures that were meant in their forms to reference the San Francisco Peaks and the geological strata of the peaks. And they were hung with linens, and those linens were dyed with turmeric ink, and they also had some text painted on them, some poetry, which was painted in ochre, natural ochre and clay pigments. And we were interested in turmeric, one because of the bright yellow color, but also because it fades in the sun. And when it comes to a site like this that has so much communal memory, we were interested in what fades over time, what remains over time, what parts of the story are passed down and remain over time. So for the text on the linens, we worked with community members in the Indigenous Nations Library program, and with students from the Naka Inspired Schools Network. And we led workshops with them in which we offered 2 prompts, one of our own prompts and one from a Dene poet, Jake Skeets, about memory as a kind of field that you enter into. And we also invited these participants to just share other writing with us that they felt engaged the topics of the site, understanding that they might have things to say that we couldn't prompt, and things to share and parts of their stories to share. So the text that's ultimately on the sculptures is kind of a found poem woven from the words of these different community members. And that is the part of the installation that sort of remains and comes through and doesn't fade after the turmeric has.
Beautiful. Thank you for that really kind of descriptive entry into the project. I'm interested to know more about, how long of a period of engagement did this project unfold over? I mean, it sounds like there were several different phases and aspects of it. So kind of when did it start? And then, how long did it take to the installation?
I think we were accepted in the fall or the winter of 2020, because we were organizing our community workshops from about February through April. And it was a very difficult time to organize community workshops. A lot of community organizations that were completely at the end of their tether with COVID. Many schools were as well. So we were very grateful that we could get in with NACA and with INLP. So,
what were the age of the students that you were working with?
They were high school students.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there was kind of an age range. It was a poetry class that's led by Jessica Helen Lopez. And yeah, so the library program we had, I believe, college students and adults, and then for the program with the young people, we had high school age students.
Oh, wow. So it was really intergenerational.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And so then when did the installation itself take place?
The installation went up at the beginning of July. So we were in production making the sculptures May and June. And the project had a runtime because the premise of this exhibition is that they're ephemeral outdoor sculptures. So it ran through July and August, and it just closed on August 31st.
With regards to the manifestation of the poem in its sculptural form, and the dyeing of the textiles and the application of the words in ochre, was this also a participatory aspect that included the students and the public, or was this something that was just enacted by you and Amaris for that part of the project?
That part was the two of us. First of all, it was, we were still in a very unsure COVID space. So organizing things in person still felt a little bit unsafe. So we did the workshops over Zoom, and we're actually right now creating a zine that contains pictures of the process. It contains all the poems and pictures of the final installation. So that's going to go back. We're going to send that back to everyone who participated as kind of a document and a thank you. But that was sort of what we saw as our role. We kind of felt like our skills and our tactile creation will be just kind of the conduit for these stories. So that was the part that we worked on collaboratively.
I'm interested to know if you sourced the ochre itself from somewhere locally or no.
I got them. They were passed down to me from a friend of mine, Lindsay Fromm, who I work with at Friends of the Orphan Signs, and she had sourced some of these paints locally, some of the clay paints, and had sourced some of them from elsewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting, this work with natural materials and sort of the, mutability, fragility that they have embodied within themselves, and the ways in which they reflect impermanence. I feel like that's a theme that carries across a lot of your work, beyond this installation. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what role, that transformation, first of all, of language into a physical form holds for you, and also your choice to often manifest that through natural materials such as mud, ochre, other formats like that?
I've always been much more interested in found and ephemeral materials than I have been in sort of manufactured sculptural materials. I've worked with metal and with wood, but I'm always just much more interested, even if I'm working with those materials, in things that I find and in things that sort of tell the story of the place where I found them in a way. And when you asked me about rituals, I thought about the fact that so much of my practice has always involved collecting. And I think that that's also just part of my personality from when I was a child. I was always picking up, little rocks and dandelions and clumps of clay and, objects in my house and trying to make meaning out of them. So I'm interested in the way those materials break down. I'm interested in the fact that they're not always permanent, or that they can't have, kind of a lasting form. I think a lot about memory throughout my work, and memory is something that is changeable over time and that we can lose over time and that can shift over time. So I like working with materials that also change and shift and become new things and break down, which, lends itself more to ephemeral, temporary works. But I'm okay with that. And when it comes to rendering text in dimensional forms or rendering text from these materials, I always feel like when there are two phases to it. Much of my work involves writing. My personal practice involves a lot of journaling. My community-based practice involves a lot of journaling and writing together and creating text together and sort of manifesting our stories together. And so I feel like writing is a space that gives our stories and gives the things we carry a place to exist outside of the body. Things that we can think sometimes, or what I'm feeling and what I've been through only exists in my mind. So putting it down on a piece of paper I think that's the reason writing is such a common therapeutic tool. And I've just been interested in whether there's maybe another version of that when we are giving our stories or our words physical dimensional weight in space. And many of the communities I work with are marginalized communities who, many of the community members I work with have not felt like they can safely inhabit public spaces. And so placing their words in 3 dimensions in those public spaces feels interesting to me, and it feels, I don't know, like giving something presence and the weight that it deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's powerful. I think the ways in which you work are so multifaceted, but again, like a through line is that you really act as a conduit, for connection among people, to place, to personal experience and sort of broader social and cultural issues. And it's interesting to see how, you work across media and cultures and languages, and really, you are a conduit for these connections and manifestations and revelations. I'm just wondering if there are some aspects about your creative practice where ritual plays a role in something that is kept more personal in a way that helps you to step into that role then as a conduit and create space and experience for others. I don't know if there's anything that you could share about that.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great distinction, I think, to make between the sort of public facing or public engaged parts of a practice and the more private parts of a practice. And the idea of being a conduit or being a connection is something that we talk a lot about in the translation world, as well in my work as a literary translator. So it's just interesting that you bring that up, because I hadn't really thought about that as a connective tissue between different parts of my practice before. But in my private part of my practice, I mean, I think there's a lot I have to do sometimes to prepare myself to work collaboratively and within community. It's absolutely the work I want to do. It's also something that I don't take lightly. It's a very vulnerable thing for people to share their stories with me and to place their trust in me in those spaces, and to share it with other people who sometimes are people they know, but also might be strangers. So there's a lot I have to do to get myself into a space where I'm not nervous, or, I mean, there's always a little bit of nerves, but I just want very much to do right by the communities that I work with. So in the private elements of my practice, I still do, journaling is still a huge part of it for me. I think whenever there's something that I want to think through, or there are prompts that I'm going to share with other people, or there are topics I'm going to bring up in community, I first go through those things for myself, and I first try to understand how I come to a particular topic and my positionality within that topic. I do a lot of reading. I read all I can to sort of understand different perspectives on a subject that I'm working with. And I do a lot of kind of drawing and documenting. Sometimes, that is relevant to place. Like if I'm working with a particular site, creating site-specific work, I might go to the place alone and do some observational drawing and some material collecting. And especially when I'm working site specifically, that's a big part of what I do on my own. And then I think I also have my own self-care rituals that just put me in the space I need to be in. I make tea like 5 times a day. I make time to go out on walks and runs, and to sort of give myself a space that's disconnected from technology, disconnected from screens. I spend a lot of time with the people and animals I care about, and those are some of my little private rituals.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important to have that space that is regenerative, as particularly because, I mean, the energetic output that we experience in our creative practice is super powerful. But then when you're engaging in community and vulnerable and marginalized communities, that's holding a really different energetic and emotional space, as you had indicated. And yeah, I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts that you might have on your experiences of that work that you have created as a conduit, as a translator, working across cultures, and what are some of the activities perhaps that you invite participants into to create that space where that translation and that conversation across cultures can happen?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of activities that are very specific to the particular projects that we work on, and then there are some commonalities across many of my workshops. So I do a lot of free writing in my workshops, and I usually try to give framing to that, where I'll start with a very simple prompt to sort of get people into the act of writing. And we push ourselves to begin writing right when the time starts, even if we don't know what we want to say yet, because writing is just such a different logical mode than the way we hold words in our mind, and it organizes meaning in such a particular way. So I like getting people loose and helping them see that they can find what they want to write. You don't have to come to a page already knowing what you want to say, already knowing what to share. The writing itself can lead you there. So that's sort of the common exercise that begins most of my workshops. For many of my sculptural workshops or projects that involve some sort of final sculptural installation, I'll do workshops that involve material manipulation, sometimes where the participants are helping me to build up the sculpture, build up the installation. So the work I did at SFAI, working with the youth from YouthWorks of Santa Fe, we made an Adobe installation of like hand-built letters, and they learned the process for how to do that and created it with me, often kind of attached to the writing workshop. So we would do a bit of writing and then we would do a bit of making, which I think helps us to process things in a different way. I think there's something healing in the writing. I think there's something healing in the tactile manipulation. There's something calming about working with certain materials. And in an installation that is still underway, but that I began with youth artists at Working Classroom here in Albuquerque, we are building a sculpture out of cast gypsum. So they learned the process of casting gypsum and learned the process of building it up, and were my collaborators in creating the sculpture, as well as the aspect of it that is storytelling and writing.
That's beautiful. I can't wait to see that project. I think it's really interesting the ways in which you meld these different practices, of working with words and storytelling, language, and then, the physical manifestation of work, sculpturally and as installation. It's really unique. And I'm thinking back on the article that I read in the Southwest Contemporary about the Afterbeams project and the larger installation at Fort Sumner, and that the whole project was inspired by a letter that were written by students and left at the site. And I was just wondering if you or any of the other participants in the project had access to that letter.
So they chose that site based on a letter. actually didn't know that they did a write-up of that project.
Yeah, it was inspired by a letter left by Navajo students at the Fort Sumner Historical Site in June 1990 in response to what they felt was more of a shrine to Billy the Kid, who met his end at Fort Sumner, than an accurate take on history. And so they asked for a revision to that story to include, quote, what really happened to our ancestors. So I don't know, it was an interesting kind of open bookend for me to your project, which is going to be bookended on the other side with this zine that you're creating, out of gratitude for the participants. And then in between is this, physical manifestation in the landscape and of the landscape of these words. It just seems like a really powerful melding of writing and of storytelling together with more of the visual arts. And it's just such a unique way of making that I personally haven't really ever encountered before.
I really didn't know about that letter. That's incredibly beautiful. And we felt, we did the library program, but we felt really strongly about working with young people for this project. And I'm not sure we ever fully articulated why we felt that way. But it's so interesting then that young people were the genesis of, making the site more factual and making it more, and of asserting their own presence at this site. That's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming to the close of our time together, but I didn't know if you had any final thoughts, if there's anything else that you wanted to share about your practice, this particular project, or things that you might have in the works and coming up that we should know about.
Well, it's interesting. This, I think like a lot of artists, I've been kind of reassessing my relationship to, or the relationship between creativity and productivity in my practice over this last year. It's been a really hard time to be a working artist and to also take care of yourself. So in terms of things that I'm working on or in the works right now, I've been writing a lot. I have a book launching today, the book of translations by the Peruvian poet Blanca Varela that launches today. So that's been something that we've been promoting and working on for the past month. I have other manuscripts that I've just been investing a lot of time in recently, manuscript of poetry, a manuscript of fiction. It's felt like, I'm in this uncertain place. I'm about to move. So it's felt really nice to just immerse myself in words lately.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on the work that's launching today. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and get a little bit, deeper into some of the aspects of your multifaceted creative practice. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you. It was really fun to think through it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tilt Podcast. And a very special thank you to our two wonderful guests, Tintawi Kaigziabiher and Sara Danielle Rivera. As always, Tilt Podcast is released on the fourth Friday of every month. Be sure to check out every single episode on our website and on our Podbean page. And while you're on our website, check out the SFAI in the news section. You can find out all of the great upcoming events, exhibitions, installations, and more from our resident alumni, current residents, and even our very own staff members, Netsapan Ma and Tony Gentili. They have exhibitions too. Visit our website, sfai.org.